Before I moved to the US, I lived in a world where vulnerability was dangerous. Where I grew up, emotions were meant to be kept to myself. Tears were weakness. Fear was shame. Tenderness was something to hide. And I learned to be silent. I was the one who always held on. Even when everything was falling apart inside. I was the one who smiled when I wanted to scream. The one who said, "It's okay," when nothing was okay. 'Cause I thought it was the right thing to do. That it was right. That it wouldn't break me. I hid myself. Not because I didn't want to be real. But because I didn't know if I would be accepted. I was afraid of being too much. Too emotional. Too sensitive. Too alive. That was before my career. To new cities. To new people. I didn't know who I wanted to be then. But I already knew who I didn't want to be. Someone who lives in armor. I remember one evening. I was in my own home. Silence. The light of a lamp. And a letter that I didn't dare to send. A letter to a person who had hurt me. Didn't offend me. Didn't betray me. Just touched something deep. And I didn't know how to say it. I wrote, "I don't know why this hurts so much. I don't know why I'm silent. I don't know why it's so important to me that you read this." And then I erased it. Because I thought, this is too personal. This is too weak. This is not something to show. I didn't send that letter. But it stayed with me. As proof that I want to speak. That I want to be open. That I want to be not only strong but also real. At that time, I didn't know yet that this was the beginning. The beginning of the path to vulnerability. Not as weakness, but as a strength that doesn't scream. And it just is. I am Valentine. And that was before the USA. Before my career. Before my confidence. But even then I began to understand. What I hide is not a burden. It is a part of me. And it deserves to be heard. I thought for a long time that if I was honest, they would embrace you. That if I said how much it hurts, they would hear you. That if I showed myself to be real, they wouldn't leave you. And I dared. It wasn't a heroic gesture. Not a scene from a movie. Just a conversation. With a person I trusted. I said that it was hard for me. That I couldn't cope. That I don't know how to be myself when everyone else is waiting for me. I spoke quietly. Without pathos. Without demands. Just as I am. And she was silent. For a long time. And then she said, "You're just making things too complicated." And I fell silent. Not because she was right. But because I didn't know how to protect my sincerity. I felt as if I had been sent back. To that space where emotions are an inconvenience. Where vulnerability is a burden for others. Where it's better to be silent than to be too much. I returned home and sat in the dark for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't think. Just was. And something in me changed. Didn't break, it changed. I understood. Sincerity doesn't guarantee support. Vulnerability doesn't always save. But it does change. Shows who you are. And who's around. I didn't become tougher. I didn't close down. On the contrary. I began to listen to myself more carefully. I no longer expected to be understood the first time. I no longer demanded to be accepted without objection. I simply allowed myself to be. Even if it was uncomfortable. Even if it wasn't to everyone's liking. That was the first lesson. Vulnerability isn't about how others react. It's about my willingness to be alive. And I chose not to hide. Not to erase myself. Not to become lighter. Chose to stay. Even if it didn't save me. Because it was the truth. And the truth has power. I am Valentine. And I am learning to be vulnerable. Not so that I will be loved. But so that I will no longer betray myself. It was random. I hadn't planned to speak. I hadn't prepared. I was just sitting in a coffee shop I frequented. With my notebook as usual. Writing something incomprehensible as usual. And she came up. A barista I'd seen dozens of times but never really known. She said, "You always look like you have something important going on inside." Smiled. Politely. But there was something genuine in her voice. And I said, "Yeah. It's just hard to be yourself sometimes when it's not always convenient for others." She didn't flinch. She didn't turn away. She didn't change the subject. She sat down next to me and said, "I know what you're talking about." And we talked for an hour, maybe more, about how hard it is to be sensitive in a world that values control. About how often we keep quiet because we're afraid of being a burden. About how vulnerability isn't weakness. It's a form of presence. I didn't try to be understood. I didn't look for the right words. I just spoke. And she listened. She didn't judge. She didn't correct. She was just there. And it was new. Because I was used to the fact that sincerity is a risk. And here she became a connection. I came home and thought for a long time. Why was this conversation so important? And I understood, not because she supported me, but because I allowed myself to be open, without guarantees, without a script, without fear. And it created a space where I wasn't alone. This was the second lesson. Vulnerability is an invitation, not a demand, not proof, but an invitation to a real connection. And not everyone accepts it, but those who accept remain in the heart forever. I am Valentine, and I am learning to be vulnerable, because that's the only way I can be in a relationship that doesn't require masks. Everything was simple in the family. You have to be strong. You have to cope. You have to not create problems. And I learned to be a convenient son. The one who doesn't complain. The one who doesn't cry. The one who always says, "I'll figure it out," even when they don't know how. I was silent for a long time. About fatigue. About fear. About the fact that sometimes you just want to be, without expectations. But silence doesn't heal. It accumulates. And one day I said, not loudly, not with pretense, just honestly, "It's hard for me. I can't cope. I don't want to be the one who is always strong." And the silence, long tense. Then the phrase that I've heard all my life. "Don't exaggerate. You're fine." And I realized, they're not ready. Not because they don't love me, but because they don't know how to see me like this. Vulnerable. Alive. Not armored. I didn't get angry. I wasn't offended. I just felt. I no longer wait for permission. I will no longer prove that I have the right to emotions. I will no longer hide so as not to disappoint. 'Cause this is not love. This is a role. And I no longer want to play. I began to talk to myself differently. Not as someone who has to cope, but as someone who has the right to be. I was no longer ashamed of tears. I did not apologize for my silence. I did not explain why I was hurting. I simply was. And this was new. This was the third lesson. Vulnerability is not something that needs to be agreed with others. It is something that needs to be allowed. And even if you are not accepted, you are no longer betraying yourself. I am Valentine, and I am learning to be vulnerable, even where they are used to seeing me as strong. Because my dignity is not in enduring. It is in not hiding. I've long thought that fear is something that needs to be overcome. That it's like an enemy, like an obstacle, like a weakness. But fear isn't what stands between me and life. It's a part of life. I'm afraid. I'm afraid of losing again. I'm afraid of loving again. I'm afraid that if I open up, it'll hurt again. But I don't want to live in the shadow of this fear anymore. I want to live with it. Not against it. Not instead of it. But alongside it. Because fear is not betrayal. It's not proof that I'm weak. It's proof that I matter. I allow myself to be afraid. I allow myself to not know. I allow myself to be uncomfortable, uneven, alive. 'Cause life is not about control. Not about confidence. It's about presence. I no longer want to be the one who copes. I want to be the one who feels. Who cries when it hurts. Who laughs when it's warm. Who is silent when there are no words. I don't know what tomorrow will be like. Maybe it will be hard again. Maybe it will be empty again. But I'm not alone anymore. 'Cause I am with myself. With the one who went through loss and stayed. With the one who learned to speak, even when the voice trembles. This letter is not about ending, but about starting. Starting to live. Not like before. Not like it should. But like I can. With pain. With memory. With fear. And with love that hasn't disappeared. It just changed form. I allow myself to be afraid. And I allow myself to live.